Okay, we're going to talk about death. Death is funny because most of us struggle with it. Many of us fear death, our own death. Many of us either fear the death of a loved one or are deeply affected by the death of a loved one. And the interesting thing is that death is, it's really just the flip side of birth. It is an inescapable part of life. And if we shift our perspective on death, we can begin to develop a greater sense of ease around death and even dying, even grief and grieving. So, if we really look at it, it's exactly what is supposed to happen to us. It's a foregone conclusion. It's not a surprise, and it's not a misfortune or a mistake. Now, we, in our human perspective, we develop a timeline and we get very attached to that timeline. We think that death, people will say, oh, she lived to a ripe old age. Oh, they had a great life. And so that's one human way that we make ourselves comfortable with death. And that death is really, truly no different than a death that happens at an earlier age or after a difficult life. Because the only thing that death is death is when our soul no longer inhabits our physical body. Because we are all souls. First and foremost, we are souls. We are souls that have experience and consciousness prior to being in this body, and we are souls that have experience and consciousness long after we are no longer in this body. Our current body is very temporary. It's a temporary housing for our soul. Now, as part of being in our body, we forget. We forget what went on before. It's hard to realize that anything will come after. And so we place a great deal of importance on our body and our very temporal time here in our body. As a way to feel comfortable with death, some people will turn to religion or spirituality, and that's not at all a bad thing, and it's a wonderful motivation to turn to religion or spirituality. But ideally, we would want to practice a religion or have a sense of spirituality because of a deep longing or a deep desire to know more or be more connected or to live a different kind of life. But for some people, that's how they come to a more spiritual aspect of themselves, is trying to deal with the fear of death and dying, or the grief of having lost a loved one. And that's not bad. That's perfectly fine. It's okay. And often through that experience, we come to a greater spiritual depth. Oftentimes people who have a terminal illness will become very spiritual or religious or contemplative in the last years or months or weeks of their life, as they begin to search for what's coming next and begin to kind of feel a security in, oh, there is something coming next. And it's very beneficial, not just for the person who does that soul searching, but it's also oftentimes really helpful to their loved ones and their family members who get to witness that soul searching, and perhaps we as witnesses learn from that. It's not a bad thing that we come to our spirituality because of death, but it's also nice if we choose to come to a spirituality from a different place.